This video will show you how to replace the front lower ball joint on a Pontiac Grand Prix. This is part of the front steering and suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front end of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and we can get the wheel off of here. A quick note about doing this job, you will need a 4-wheel alignment when we're done. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, we have a clear view of our front brakes. We're paying attention to the center where our axle nut is. I'm using a 34mm. I want to remove this nut and then break the axle free from the wheel bearing. To help break this free, I'm using a hammer and punch directly in the center of the axle so I do not cause any damage. Now that I have movement from there, let's continue on behind this area. As we look behind this area, we're paying attention for where our lower ball joint connects to our steering knuckle. We're going to separate this area. Now, if you look in between the ball joint stud and the axle, you're typically going to find that you have a cotter pin that we have to try to make our way in between and remove. The mounting nut is a castle nut, and the cotter pin holds it, preventing it from loosening up. Now, since I'm working on the driver's side of the vehicle, I've turned the wheel all the way towards the left. If I was on the passenger side, I'd be turning it the opposite direction. As for that ball joint mounting nut, we're using an 18mm. Go ahead and turn that counterclockwise. We're starting to unscrew it from the ball joint. During the removal process of the mounting nut, you may find that it gets stuck on the axle. That's okay. We're going to continue on by separating the ball joint stud from the knuckle. For this, I like to use some penetrant in this area, and then I'm going to start lightly tapping. I need to be able to pull the ball joint stud down far enough that I can remove that mounting nut. To help separate this, I typically like to use a long pry bar for leverage. Looking at the control arm, you can see that we have circular ports. You can see one down on the bottom. It has the same exact thing along the top. I'm using my pry bar down and through this area. I'm applying light pressure. Now with my hammer, I'm going to be tapping on my steering knuckle where my ball joint stud is. We need to cause vibration to break this free. There we are. Let's carefully remove our pry bar and we'll continue on. So we're just going to separate this. I'm pulling down on the control arm and pulling that aside. Now that we have this separated from the steering knuckle, let's pay attention to the mounting hardware holding our ball joint to that control arm. Now I've marked the 3 rivet heads that we need to remove. Once I've shaved these off, using my cutting wheel, I'm going to have to use a hammer and punch or an air hammer and drive the remaining portion of each one of the rivets up and out through this area. You may also have to trim off the top area of the rivets as well. It really just depends on your application. Now that I've removed the head of that rivet, I'm going to be using my air hammer. Like I said, you can use a hammer and punch. When we do this, you may find the control arm moves around on you. Just be aware of that. Now, if you find that the control arm moves around too much on you and you want to prevent that, just carefully slide the ball joint stud back inside the steering knuckle. pull down on that. There's what's left to our rivet. And now the process would be the same for all others. Got it, so my last rivet is ready to come out of here. There's that. Now that I finished removing all of the rivets, we should be able to pull down on the control arm, once again removing the stud from the steering knuckle. We'll slide that out of the way and then remove the ball joint from inside of the control arm. There it is, friend. Prior to installing our brand new ball joint, let's make sure we clean and inspect the mounting area, so we're paying attention to our control arm. I'm going to clean this up using a wire brush. A close inspection to make sure nothing's rotted or weak. A little bit of rust is okay, but we definitely want to make sure we have a good mounting surface. This looks good. And now it's time for installation of the brand new lower ball joint. We'll make sure we have it in the proper orientation so the stud is facing upward. We're going to carefully pull away on our knuckle. We'll slide the ball joint into position and continue on with the hardware. You're going to find that your brand new ball joint came with brand new hardware, which is what we'll be using. If necessary, you could tap that into position. Typically, it should slide in. As far as the new hardware, we're taking the new mounting bolts and sliding them down through the port in the control arm, through the ball joint, and through the other end of the control arm. On the lower side, we have brand new mounting nuts. As far as these mounting nuts, you're going to find that one side does have a neoprene locker. The other side will not. The side without the locker faces down. For this hardware, I'm going to be using a 16mm at the top and the bottom. Now that I have that bottomed out, I'm going to be torquing each of these to 30 foot-pounds. Double check to make sure that the ball joint is completely secured to the lower control arm. The ball joint should not move around in any way. At this point, let's get the ball joint stud back in the knuckle. Things to pay attention to as we start bringing this down: we have to pull the knuckle in. When we bring this in, make sure the axle slides into the wheel bearing. Get my ball joint stud ready. Now it's time for our ball joint mounting nut. When we go to install this, we're going to bottom it out. The torque for this is 15 foot-pounds plus an additional 120 degrees, which is essentially a third of a turn. Once we've done that, we're going to have to align the port for our cotter pin. Looking at the ball joint stud, you can see it has a small hole, and looking at the ball joint mounting nut, you can tell that there's several slots for that cotter pin to slide through. If it's not properly aligned, continue tightening the mounting nut until the very next slot is, and then install that cotter pin. I'll be using an 18mm for my mounting nut. There we go. Now, to tighten or torque this, you may find it's easiest if the wheel is turned all the way towards the side of the vehicle that you're working on. Same as during the removal process. All right, so there's that. Now it's time for that additional 120 degrees or 1/3 of a turn. I'm just going to use a regular ratchet for this so I don't cause any damage to my torque wrench. Go a little further there. After making that additional turn, I'm paying attention to the slots on that castle nut just as I mentioned. I want to make sure I'm properly aligned with the port, and if it's not, I'll just continue tightening until it is. I have a brand new cotter pin. Slide it straight on through. On the opposite side, obviously I have to pin this over. I want to make sure this nut does not loosen up while I'm driving down the road. Now it's time for the axle nut. We'll make sure we start that on by hand. Now when you go to tighten this, you may find that this entire thing rotates on you. To help prevent that, we're just using a screwdriver inside the rotor cooling fins down along the bottom. So when we turn this clockwise, it'll go up against the brake caliper and prevent it from spinning. Now to tighten this, I'm going to be using a hand tool. We want to make sure that it's snug. We're not using an impact tool because we don't want to cause any damage to that bearing. Now after bottoming it out, we're going to be torquing it to 118 foot-pounds. Let's reinstall our wheel. Start on all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. Once you have them all started on, snug them up. We'll get the wheel back on the ground and then torque each lug nut to 100 foot-pounds. Now that I have the wheel back on the ground, I'm going to be torquing each one of my lug nuts to that 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we finished our installation. Now the next thing you have to do is take your vehicle for a road test. You're going to listen for any odd noises and get yourself a 4-wheel alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.